pleasure to be here to talk to you and with your students. And I actually don't feel like a good ecologist, but what I think is what makes a difference in my career is I've been spending so much time in the field, and that's the only way for you to become like original, to have new ideas, to have inspiration to do something different. Otherwise, you will keep your eyes in books, in the papers, and then you learn from others' studies. But to have different ideas, to change your mind, you must be in the field for a long time. And that's the way. And then you have many questions, obviously, and it brings me a great motivation to keep going, to have other students, and you were one of my best students ever. And sometimes I find one that is near you, and I feel really happy because these students help me a lot to answer all these questions.
So I remember when we were starting to collaborate, where you were teaching me everything about science and ecology, you spent a lot of time in the field, just looking at plants and trying to identify them and trying to understand why they were where they were. But at some point you try to understand how you're changing those communities. And I was just wondering how this accumulated knowledge of forest and savannas sort of contributed you as a basis to move to the more ecological field, like to insert your knowledge into a broader context. Because I know very few people who have spent so much time looking at plants, understanding plants, almost having a connection, personal connection with all these plants, the natural history of the systems. And usually in Brazil, we had a phytophysiology type of approach.
Yeah. Phytophysiology or phytosociology?
Phytosociology, yeah, sorry.
That's a word that only Brazilians use.
And then you shift more towards the ecology of the system.
Yes. What I can say is my career, my way of work was strongly influenced by my job itself. Because I work for a research institution, but actually, Instituto Florestal do Estado de São Paulo is much more than that. We are in charge for all protected areas in the state, and we have to do research, we have to do public policies, we have to do environmental education. We are all the time preparing management plans or revising some regulations. And we have to take decisions about ecosystem management. And then applied questions come every day because you have like biological invasions. You have pine trees invading open ecosystems, and you need answers. You need ecological answers to take decisions. And I think I was like obliged to do research, ecological research myself, because the answers were not in the books yet. They were not in the papers. Many times I had to find the answers. And I think that was the main motivation that drove me to ecology and not only describing these ecosystems.
And you grew up doing science in a region that was quite altered by human activities for a long time. And in this class, we talk a lot about how to define a healthy forest. What do you mean by healthy forest? And is it a pristine forest? Is it a primary forest? Or even an ecosystem? And I was just wondering, after looking at different types of forests, different types of savannas, different types of grasslands, and that have been impacted by human activities, can you look at a system and say, I think this is a healthy system?
That's a tough question. What I think, because we are in restoration, I work with ecological restoration all the time, and we are all the time in search for reference ecosystems. And actually, we are trying to use a range of natural ecosystems that are possible states of healthy ecosystems in the same region. And then, for instance, this morning I was helping a student who's publishing her results, and she compared restored forests using a single tree species with restored forests using a mixed stands, mixed plantation, and compare it with primary forests, secondary forests, and degraded forests. If you ask me, only the primary forests are healthy, I would say no. No, you can have secondary forests that are really healthy. And you can have degraded forests, what we call degraded forests. Forests that were never clear cut, but they had cattle inside, or some trees were cut at a certain moment, and they were like exploited in the past and recovered. They are different from the primary forest in some ways, but I would say they are healthy. And how do I say this? Because they are all the time recovering. They have an understory that is dynamic, so they have diversity, they have ecological process, they have gap dynamics, so they work as a primary force in many ways, and they slightly differ in the structure and sometimes in composition, but in general there are not many differences.
And I'm very glad, because I had a tricky question for them, how you define a healthy forest, and they keep asking me how you properly define. I keep saying that it is not an easy task, especially when you go from a local study, ecological study, to more regional study, to actually a monitoring program that have to cover an entire country. For example, they have to simplify the metrics you use to define what is a healthy forest and what is not, and sometimes we may get in trouble. But I was just wondering, sort of, with these baselines you have to build, either with forests or savannas, to say this is a good restoration project and this is not a good restoration project. Right, so what have you learned so far from these studies you have done in São Paulo?
In terms of savanna restoration?
Or both, sort of, do you use this healthy system, or your reference systems? Is it very strict, or you have a broad range of conditions that would say this is a good restoration, but doesn't have to necessarily connect to the primary forest, this pristine forest or pristine savanna? I was just wondering how much slack you give in terms of the goal of the restoration and how the forest looks like. How different can they be?
After 30, 40 years doing this, I simplified my description of good restoration. Good restoration to me is that resulting in a similar structure to the reference system, and it must be stable. It must keep working without human intervention. You know, it must be resilient. And if it's a forest, you must check if you have seedlings, if you have saplings, and if you have the forest renovating itself. And if it's a savanna, I think you have to burn. If your restored savanna survives, keeps diversity and structure, this is a successful restoration.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about the concept of old growth forest in the class. And I was just wondering whether you have a concept that you like to use for old growth savannas.
Yeah, we wrote that, published that paper led by Joe Feldman when he launched the concept of old growth savannas and grasslands, because he thought that we needed that to find a balance, because when you say old growth forest, you think that it's very, very special. So we needed something similar to grasslands and savannas. And, you know, that was a success. It has been cited a lot. And so people are considering that a good concept. And it's all attached to decomposition, and savannas and grasslands. They have some species that are really, really rare. And when we are rare, I mean rare in the world, in the planet, but locally sometimes they are abundant. But if you try to reproduce them, to make seedlings, to sow seeds, to use them in restoration projects, you are gonna have problems, because or they don't produce seeds every year, or they produce just a few seeds, or these seeds don't germinate, or they germinate and the seedlings die in the field. So you have some species that spend 10 years without leaving a single descendant. And this is something that you'll never find in tropical forests, for instance. This is not a problem there. So what happened across the evolution is savanna and grassland species, especially the woody ones, not the grasses, but not the forests, but the shrubs and subshrubs. They have so specialized underground structures to resprout after fire, after herbivory, after frost, after cutting, after whatever you have as a disturbance. They will sprout again 1, 2, any times. And I think when these strategies were selected, some genes that were good for sexual reproduction were lost. That's what I think. So old growth savannas and grasslands have these species in high density, in high diversity. But secondary savannas and secondary grasslands, they lost this special group of plants.
And Gigi, what happens if we don't burn savannas in your region, at least where you are?
In the region where I am, we have already data, evidence to demonstrate that they will turn into forest. Up to 2 years ago, we thought that the wet grasslands, the ones that are waterlogged, and then they are saturated, soil is saturated over the year, we thought that these could be permanent. But we carried out an experiment. We planted trees in these wet grasslands, and we found that if you plant seeds, they will fail. But if you plant seedlings like 30, 40 centimeters tall, they will survive. They grow slowly, and the closer to the surface is the water table, the slower will be the growth rate, but they will survive. And so even in these wet grasslands, if you don't burn, they will turn into forest. And it's happening because when we mapped forest cover in our study sites. Over 30 years, we found the wet grasslands, the dry grasslands, the open savannas being replaced by dense savannas or even forests.
So you are in a wetter region of the savanna sort of distribution, right? And I was just wondering whether, isn't it, we are studying forests, the future of forests. Isn't it good that savannas turned into forests?
That's a question that I have listened many times because people in general have this view that forests are the most important and beautiful ecosystems in the world. And I changed my mind because I was born in the Atlantic Forest region and I've moved to work in the Cerrado, that is the Brazilian savanna. And I fell in love for these open ecosystems because they are really special. And so what happens when a savanna or a grassland turns into a forest is it loses lots of savanna specialists, grassland specialists, and this happens with plants and with animals like lizards, snakes, frogs, birds, because we have fauna, we have animals adapted to open ecosystems, and we have forest animals. Then, when the vegetation changes, also the faunal biodiversity changes. And that means locally in my study sites, we have had extinctions, and local extinctions.
No,
And
that's
a big problem.
yeah, no, I was just teasing you. I knew that you had a very good answer. And I was just wondering, so there's this push for restoration now of different systems, especially forests, but also keep these old growth savannas with fire. And I was just wondering, how do you see the role of restoration? So why should we restore some of this degraded systems? Because it is not an easy task. We've been studying this for a long time and it's still difficult to figure it out, the exact approach that'll be
Yeah,
successful.
yeah. And you know, until 10 years ago, can you have a break?
Let me pause here. Yeah, let me pause and then I'll come back pretty soon. So, Zichi, as I was asking, so it is not an easy task. It's not cheap to restore degraded ecosystems. And so how do you see the role of restoration in sort of why should we restore, in which situations?
That's a very good question because what happened with restoration in the 10 years was like a global disappointment because there was some glamour of restoration until 10 years ago because people believed that we could replicate ecosystems very similar to those that were destroyed. But science, in the end of the last decade, so several papers at the same time demonstrated that no, the restored ecosystem will never be similar, equivalent to the one that was there before. So we must be less ambitious. We must accept the limitations of restoration. And then, okay, let's go ahead. Yeah? And what are the consequences of this? The consequence to me, the first one is we have to do everything we can to avoid degradation, to avoid cerrado conversion to soybean, to avoid deforestation of the Amazon forest, whatever, all ecosystems, natural ecosystems remaining. We should do whatever we can in many ways, in science, in practice, in political decisions, to avoid land conversion. And where to restore? We need priorities, and this has been a problem because money is not enough to do the restoration in the whole world. What most scientists are doing to find priorities is they set criteria, and the criteria are not the ones I think are the best, because they are saying that we should do first where it's easier and cheaper. And that means we should put money where there is a high potential for natural regeneration, because it's cheaper than planting trees in large scale or planting grasses in large scale. But what happens? These places are never the ones where we need more restoration. In my opinion, we should give priority to places where people need a better ecosystem, where we have big environmental problems like soil erosion, desertification, and other problems, like in Brazil, Mariana, in Minas Gerais, Rio Doce, that disaster, and you have huge regions that were completely destroyed. So for me, we should do first areas that are not producing anything, not even carbon or sequestration for grasses, or not even weeds are there, and where you have degradation process ongoing, like pollution, like silting, soil particles going to the rivers, and real degradation. In my opinion, these people that think we should replace soybean, corn plantation, sugarcane plantation by planted forests, I think it's not priority. We should do first what is more important. In a farm, I do believe that the riparian zones are really important, and if there are some negative process ongoing, they must be isolated and sometimes restored. But far from the rivers, far from the springs, if you have nothing wrong happening and you have production happening, these areas should not be priority at this moment, because we need what has been produced there. If we replace this by forest restoration, this production has to come from other places,
Yeah, no, it makes total sense we stop deforestation before we just spend, if it was a limited amount of resources, then we are putting our efforts into restoring deforested areas. It seems that it's not the best the most logical way to avoid losses of species or carbon storage and everything else.
And there is a debate among restoration ecologists, because laws are made about mitigation. You are doing a big industry, you have to destroy a natural ecosystem because you are going to do something there. And then the law says, oh, you just have to mitigate planting, restoring in another place. And we know that what you are going to lose, you will never recover in another side. And this is a special situation, because there are lots of money involved in these cases. And if your industry is going to produce something that's going to cost $10, you must put in the cost. You have to restore a much bigger area to find a balance, and then you do more area of less quality to compensate one smaller area. that was high quality ecosystem. Then people try to find this equilibrium.
But let's think more sort of think very broadly in this, you know, like a global initiative. And it seems that some areas should be restored for, you know, avoid erosion or for water protection or water bodies or parent forest. And let's say that you have this huge amount of resources to do the restoration of these systems. And there's some efforts to map those areas. And it seems that in many cases, savannas are thought, or those savannas that can turn into forests are thought as potential areas for restoration in some cases, not always. And you have looked at this question a little bit. Can you tell us your sense about it?
Yeah, that has been a global mistake because there are still even scientists that believe that savannas are a product of degraded forests. So they think that if there is no forest there, it's a tropical region, something is wrong. It's a degraded ecosystem and we should plant trees there. And this belief was behind the Bone Challenge and the proposals, the global proposals from different countries to solve the problem. But we know that savannas and grasslands, tropical savannas and grasslands are natural ecosystems, and they must be savannas and grasslands. So if we consider that these areas in the map of the Bone Challenge, behind the Bone Challenge, has huge areas, almost all savannas in Africa and in South America and also in Australia, that were considered as priority areas for forest and landscape restoration. And after some years trying to tell people you are wrong, apparently decision makers are changing their minds, and we have been listening, and I think we've got more respect to savannas and grasslands, to open ecosystems, because we are a noise group of savanna ecologists in the whole world, and we are like winning the battle, but it takes a lot of time to get there.
Yeah, and I remember first time I talked to you, I think you were working on a manuscript to tell the world what Cerrado, this type of vegetation meant. And it was poorly well known, poorly understood, and you and others helped to sort of bring it to light. And I was for these students who are in different fields, environmental science, environmental policy, they are in chemistry or earth system science. Do you have, and you have worked in this management of science interface and global change, and many of these students are probably going to try to do the same. They're studying natural systems and how are changing them, how their people impact people's lives and biodiversity and everything else. So do you have an advice, having been in the middle of all this big mess in Brazil?
I have to say, congratulations. You choose a really nice way for your lives, because I really love doing all of this. And I think we have an exciting life, and we need to understand the ecosystem where we are going to work. And some people work with global change, global ecosystems, like your professor Paulo Brando. But in general, we work locally. And before taking decisions, we must understand the ecosystems that we have around. Not only the natural ecosystems, we must understand how the productive systems replace, which properties from that natural ecosystems they keep. How do you have, you can have land uses that are more friendly with the ecological process that were natural. Like in savannas, when we replace savannas by pastures. For animals, and for many plants, is just like nothing has changed. But if we replace savannas by soybean or sugarcane or eucalypt plantation, that's a huge change. So we must understand the ecology and bring the ecology for the real world to help us to take decisions. And you are going to make many mistakes as I made, and I'm going to make some more for sure. But luckily, we can do what we call adaptive management. We can try to correct our mistakes doing in a different way. And we must be also proactive because I think decision makers, they can be huge mistakes. They can make huge mistakes. But in most cases, I've learned that they do wrong things because they just don't know what's the right to do. And then we must be their friends. We must try to help them, to bring them to the field, to show them what could be the best solution. And we need to learn. And we are going to learn all the time because we are working with living systems and we know just a few about them. There is so much to learn. And then if you feel excited by learning like I feel, you're going to be a happy person for the whole life.